Welcome to the Millennial Lawyer Podcast.
Welcome back to the Millennial Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Shirian. Today, we're diving into the world of high-stakes criminal defense with one of New York's most renowned attorneys. My guest is Jeffrey Lichtman, who spent over 34 years trying some of the most toughest cases in America, from John Gotti Jr. to El Chapo, earning a reputation as a fierce advocate and masterful cross-examiner. He's also hosts the popular podcast Beyond the Legal Limit. Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So with over 34 years defending some of the highest profile criminal cases in America, from John Gotti Jr. to El Chapo, you've earned a reputation as one of the toughest advocates in the courtroom. What do you consider the most pivotal lesson from your career that shaped your approach to trial advocacy, particularly in high stakes cross-examination?
I think there has to be an overriding, terrifying fear of failure. I think that's really been probably the most important lesson that I've learned in my career, is that you have to be so terrified to lose that you're willing to do anything to win, obviously within reason. In that vein, in order to overcome some of the obstacles in these cases, the amount of work that has to be put in is tremendous. And you can never take any shortcuts. You always have to outwork the other side because they've got all the evidence on their side to begin with, the government. Right. And you're in a situation where you're walking into a courtroom with maybe a 1% chance to win any of these trials for the most part. So you've got to outwork the other side. If you outwork them, you at least have a chance. And the more work you do, the more preparation you do, the more comfortable you're going to be with your material in court, the more comfortable you're going to be when something happens that you don't expect inside the courtroom. And if you are overly prepared, and I mean more prepared than perhaps you should be, only good things can come from that.
I love that. So I started my law firm at 29 years old. I had about $15,000 to my name. I know you started your firm when you were rather young. What was that experience like, and what was the impetus of you going out on your own and wanting to do your own thing?
Well, I was working for who I considered to be the best trial lawyer in the city, Jerry Shargell, at the time. And I was with him for 6 or 7 years, and I was, I think, 32 about. And we were driving back from Lakewood, New Jersey, going to see a client. And he said to me, look, I want to tell you that I'm ready to make you partner if you'd like to be partner. But I think what's better for you, and this was, of course, the greatest thing that I ever could have imagined hearing, the greatest words ever, that I could be Jerry's partner. He said, but I think that it would be a mistake for you to do that. I think that you need to go out on your own. You'll always be in my shadow if you're my partner. And if you go out on your own, you'll make a name for yourself without me dragging you down. And of course, my thought was, well, I was already getting some business on my own. So it wasn't like I was an unknown entity. I had my own clients that I would bring into the firm when I worked with Jerry, but it was still horrifyingly scary because what if I couldn't feed myself? What if I couldn't continue to bring in cases? I would no longer have, the glow of having his name on my name. When I would go into court, I would say Jeffrey Lichtman, for the law offices of Jerry Shargell. And it was like the greatest. The judges saw me as if I was working for Jerry, so I must have been smart. But I recognize that it's time now to have a pair of balls. And if I'm ever going to actually be good at this, I need to find out, because I didn't know if I was going to be good at this. So I went out on my own. Jerry, to his great credit, got me a case immediately. The first day that I was out on my own, he brought me into a federal death penalty case, and it was sort of a soft landing. And for the first year, I stayed in Jerry's space. I rented office space from him, and it was sort of a transition period. After a year, though, I left Jerry physically, and I was completely on my own. And look, in order to do this, you can be one of these lawyers that's terrified of his own shadow and be afraid to bet on yourself. And look, there are lawyers that are somebody's associate when they're 60 years old. And I think the clients can sense their fear. They can smell their fear. I always felt, even when I was scared, even when I was terrified, I'm never going to show it. I'm never going to be afraid of the dark. I'm just going to force myself into the dark then and overcome it. And that's really what I did, is I just forced myself to overcome the fear. I never let the client see it. Whenever there was a difficult situation, I wanted to be in the middle of it. And I think that's how you have to be, at least as a defense lawyer, is you have to show the clients that you're not afraid of anything. You're not afraid of the case. You're not afraid of the moment. You're not afraid of the prosecutor who's trying to indict you. You're not afraid of the judge who's trying to get you into trouble and shut you down. And if you have all that, if you can show no fear, even when you have some fear, I think you have the opportunity to be very successful.
Unbelievable advice. I'm approaching 10 years of my own firm, and I feel like at this point I've gotten a lot of things out of my system. And I think that's the biggest thing, not having a fear for anything. You pick up so much by having that sort of mindset. Otherwise, you're dead in the water, especially in your type of field.
Yeah.
So for young criminal defense lawyers gearing up for their first trials, what specific preparation techniques or rituals do you recommend to build real confidence under intense pressure?
Well, if you know the material, I find that young lawyers today, I really don't want to sound like an old guy because, mentally I'm still 19 years old. I'm as mature
Right.
as a 19-year-old.
Right.
But I see how the practice has changed. Social media has changed everything. When I was a young lawyer, there was no such thing. Maybe there was like AOL was starting, but like there was no social media. So you had to, and there was no ability to game the internet by putting up posts and getting likes and lying about how good you are and gaming the internet with SEO. None of that shit existed. If you were good, you got good press in the newspaper and there was word of mouth and your clients might refer cases to you. Nowadays, you've got internet, you've got Instagram defense lawyers that if you read their stories or whatever, they've never lost a case. They try 1,600 cases a year. They win every single one. They just lie their asses off. And it's all about grabbing a $5,000 fee here, a $10,000 fee there. Everything is a lie. And anybody with real money, any real defendant is not looking at these people seriously. So if you want to be a putz and be a nobody, make your life on Instagram and you can lie about all of your great successes. For me as a young lawyer, I realized very quickly, I remember, look, I'm going to tell you a story that I've never told publicly before, frankly, because it's embarrassing. So you're lucky, Mark, you get to hear it. Hopefully nobody will see this podcast and they'll never get it. Before I started my first trial, it was a federal trial. And I was terrified. I was afraid because I didn't know if I was going to be good at this. I had done motions, I had done sentencings, I had, argued federal appeals, all of these things. I knew I was good at that. But when you're in the crucible of cross-examination, when it's you against another human being and there's nobody that's going to rescue you, it's just you against the other guy, with a judge who's trying to stop you, with a government that's trying to trip you up. You find out in that crucible whether or not you're going to be good at it. I had a stomach problem my whole life, for real. I don't know, if I would call it irritable bowel syndrome or just like having like a Jewish stomach, like a nervous Jewish stomach. I always had like some kind of stomach issue. My mother had Crohn's disease, and I suppose I probably had a touch of it. I'm in my first trial. It was in federal court in the Eastern District, representing a fellow named Giovanni Floridia, also known as John the Barber. It was a mafia shooting case. And I was so over-prepared for this case because I was afraid. And I wanted to make sure that there would be every possible avenue on cross-examination with each witness would be covered in my outline. As I said, I worked for Jerry Shargell. The way he'd handle a piece of cross, it would be a piece of 3,500 material, a witness statement. He'd have 3 sentences written. He'd look at it and he would just go off on his own. Me, I had every possible avenue covered. My outlines were this big. But I didn't know how good I was going to be. So I start the opening in that case for John the Barber. And I was like, wow, that felt pretty natural. I then did the first cross examination and obliterated the cooperator. And I was working on the trial with Jimmy LaRosa, who was known at the time as, along with Jerry, as probably the top criminal trial lawyer, if in forget New York and probably the entire country. And that was Jimmy's last trial. It was my first trial. He was like a father to me. And I do the cross examination, and I was shocked at how comfortable I felt and how easy it was for me. And God, it's horrible to say that something like that's easy, but I was so over prepared that when there were spontaneous moments, they were not stressful for me because I knew the material so well. There was no backing out. Anything that he could say, I had an answer for. We ended up getting a hung jury, and then the judge gave the jury an Allen charge and ended up convicting the defendants. And after the case was over, my stomach issues that I've had for my whole life for decades, gone. And
Wow.
they've never reappeared. It's been decades. They have not reappeared since then, gone.
Wow.
And I realized what was holding me back, what was making me physically sick was fear. It was fear of the unknown. I didn't know what I was capable of as a defense lawyer. And once I got rid of that fear and I recognized that you can put me in any courtroom in any place in America, you can stick me in any place globally. I've been all over the world on cases. I don't care. I don't care what the stakes are. I don't care who the prosecutor is. I don't care who the judge is. I don't care who the defendant is. I don't care about, I've got the president of Mexico is suing me right now. I've got no fear. And with no fear, there's total freedom. And with total freedom, I'm fine. You can't hurt me. And that's why I walk into these cases. I'm overly prepared. It's never lackadaisical. It's never half-assed. And what I would tell young lawyers is, look, stop spending your time bullshitting around on the internet, pretending that you're something that you're not, because clients are smart. They can smell what you are, and you can lie your ass off about what you are. The only way you're ever going to succeed is by working hard and winning. And I remember as a young lawyer asking Jerry, how do you get all this press? I got to get some press. I got to get some cases. How do I do it? I said, there's this column in the New York Times. It was called Public Lives, Mark. And it was like something that doesn't exist anymore. It was like something that everybody, forget lawyers, everybody wanted to have the profile. It was once a week. It was a color picture of the subject. And it was about somebody who wasn't like a really famous person, but had become famous in the news around that time for whatever reason.
Right.
And it would be people, sports figures, it would be authors, it would be politicians, people in the news, sometimes lawyers. I said, Jerry, how do I get into Public Lives? He said, Jeff, you think you can hire somebody, a PR person? He's like, it's all bullshit. He's like, you have to win something. So I get a phone call from a PR person, and she says, look, I want to get you on TV, and I'm starting to become big. This is before the Gotti trial. I want to get you on TV. I want to get you on CNN, Bill O'Reilly show, Hannity and Combs, all this bullshit. So I said, look, all I want is to get in the Public Lives column in the New York Times. I said, if you can get me in, I'll pay you anything you want. She calls me up after a day. She's like, look, there's no getting you into Public Lives. They pick it, and they don't listen to publicists like me. So I finished the Gotti trial. It's a huge success. We get a hung jury. We get acquittals, and everybody else in the case gets convicted of something, not me. John Gotti Jr. walks out of jail, a free man, and I'm a hero. The next day, I get a phone call. Who is it from? The New York Times Public Lives. They want to do a column on me. And it was like, I had been waiting for this phone call for so many years. And I got in the Public Lives, and of course, it's framed. It's the only article about me that's framed in my office My inside office and my exterior office is one article, is the public lives, because it meant so much to me at the time. And it says the headline was, for a lawyer who's angry, Gotti is therapy. And that's really the truth. That's really what Gotti was. He meant so much to me because it allowed me to get all of my angst, all of my frustrations out. And what I would say to young lawyers is, look, there is no substitute. You're mostly a bunch of bullshitters. You're lazy. Get off your asses. Work harder. On Christmas Eve, go visit somebody in jail. On New Year's Eve, on New Year's Day, go visit somebody in jail. On Thanksgiving at night, after you're done stuffing yourself, do some work. I remember going down to the prisons on these holidays, and they would look at me like, what are you doing here? And I remember thinking, if I'm working today, I'm getting ahead of all the other lawyers who aren't working. I'm getting a day of work and I'm learning something. Because, Mark, look, I didn't come from any money. Everything was my own. I had nothing. I didn't know anybody in the field. Any job that I got on my own by sending out letters. There was no emails back then. I couldn't call people up. Everything I got was from my own. So I recognized, look, if I can't become successful, I'm going to starve. I'm going to literally starve because I had no money. And that's why I was willing to work. If you're not willing to work that hard, you're useless. Forget to me as an employer. You're useless to yourself. And is that what you want? This isn't the kind of field where you can make $1 zillion unless you go into maybe medical malpractice and you can get gigantic awards. And it's not like these cases are every day. They're hard to get as it is. You're going to have to do it on your own. You're going to have to make money, become successful. And it's not going to happen by lying on Instagram.
I love that. That's great. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. So that's great. I know you talk about music a lot in your podcast, which I do enjoy. Although I'm a little younger than you and I come from a different time. What's the best concert that you've ever been to? Because I know you're really into music and you discuss this on your own legal podcast. So I figured I'd ask you that.
The best concert that I've ever been to. Wow. I would say probably Alex Chilton, who was from the band Big Star, played a very small club in Chapel Hill, North Carolina called Cat's Cradle. He was on his own, and the Big Star was a phenomenally great band that was not a commercial success until after basically everybody died and the band was done. And I saw Alex Chilton in this tiny little club, and I went to the bathroom during the intermission, and Alex Chilton was in the urinal next to me, and I looked at him and I said, I'd really appreciate if you can play September Girls, which is one of Big Star's most famous songs. He's like, of course I'm playing September Girls. And came out and he played it. And although it was not, maybe there was a couple hundred people there, I would say that might have been my most favorite concert. Yeah.
So New York City is preparing for a major transition with Mayor-elect Mamdani set to take office on January 1st. Amid intense debates over his policies and their potential impact on safety in communities, you've been so outspoken in supporting Israel and speaking out against anti-Semitism, which I so much appreciate and admire. How do you foresee these leadership changes affecting public safety, the Jewish community, and the broader future of criminal justice in the city?
Well, none of it's good. I mean, you've got a guy who's a socialist who wants to open up the jails, wants to cut the police force, wants to tie whatever police that's remaining their hands. He thinks that social workers should be answering 911 calls. I mean, it's going to be an utter disaster. New York will become less safe. It's already certainly less safe than when I moved here in 1990. It's not the same place. So I don't think that, having a socialist who's also a jihadist, a Hamas supporter, probably isn't a great idea in the city that gave us 9/11, where 3,000 Americans were killed on September 11th, 2001. So I think it's bad ultimately for criminal justice. Although as a defense lawyer, I suppose it may get a little bit easier and I may get some more clients, but the clients that are going to be more of are going to be people that are breaking the law for low level stuff in New York City, which frankly are not really my usual type of client. For Jews, I would say, look, I think 30% of them voted for Mamdani. You wanted it, you got it. I hope that it's just as painful as I expect it to be for you. But I really don't view those people, the Jews that voted for him, as the type of Jew that I am. So, frankly, I couldn't care less what happens to them. I mean, you've got a guy who wrote a love song to Hamas financiers when he was a rapper, which I think was his last real job. For the Holy Land Five, which is a Muslim, a Hamas financing group, and they were all convicted at trial of every charge. He's got people in his transition team that are celebrating October 7th, a massacre in Israel by Palestinians. You've got every one of them another day. You're finding horribly anti-Semitic things that they've said publicly. And Mamdani has said, listen, we just have a different of opinion of policy. He views that when you have people that work for him that say that October 7th, it was a legitimate act, massacring Israelis, kidnapping them, raping, burning them alive, cutting off their genitals, things like that. He considers that to just be a policy disagreement. So look, to Jews, I would say, you wanted this shit, you got it. Vaya con Dios, mi amigo. I hope it works out for you. For everybody else who's sane, you probably should move out of New York City, move to a place where you can. The problem is that you've got both sides. It's not just the leftists that hate Jews that are bringing this sort of sewage. They all came into America. We had an open immigration policy through Obama and Biden. It's not just the liberals. You've got obviously many people on the far right. You've got Tucker Carlson, who's suddenly became a huge supporter of Qatar, who thinks that Sharia law isn't so bad, thinks that poisoning the mind of $1 billion a year that Qatar is spending on American schools to brainwash kids, thinks that that's completely fine and thinks that it's the Jews' fault. That's the problem with America. And you got plenty of people on the MAGA side, conservatives, that have kept their mouths shut for very long about their Jew hate. And it's all out. You got Megyn Kelly. Suddenly it's okay. You got Nick Fuentes. They're mainstreaming America's most famous Nazi. You've got Jack Posa, whatever the fuck his name is. I can't even pronounce it. Suddenly he's a Jew hater that we all knew. Now he's out publicly with it because it makes them money. There's a lot of money to be made in Jew hate. So it's now we're getting it from both sides. So the problem is you're thinking, well, Jeff, you're whining. You're a Jew and you're whining about how this impacts Jews. Well, I can tell you this. We've let them in. Both sides are mainstreaming the Jew hate. Look what's happening. You've got various cities in America are being taken over by jihad supporters. Look at Dearborn. Look at Minnesota. The jihadists are all over, and they're starting to run for office. They are taking over the biggest city in the world, let alone America, the biggest city in the world. There's going to be constant Israel bashing in New York City. It's going to be taught in the schools. It's going to continue to get worse. And I would say it starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. And that's what's going to be happening now. I hope Trump has been, very wishy-washy with regard to his response. He would not criticize Tucker Carlson, even though Tucker Carlson has said that he thinks he's an idiot. He would not criticize Tucker Carlson for bringing on Nick Fuentes, and mainstreaming guy who denies the Holocaust. He won't. You've got J.D. Vance, who's our vice president and very well may be our next president. Well, he employs Tucker Carlson's son. He's come out and he is, I think, has openly supported the Nick Fuentes wing of the Republican Party by saying there's no purity test. Well, what I would say to Republicans, look, there certainly shouldn't be a purity test in terms of who should be, in our party. We should have an open tent. But if our open tent includes Nazis and Holocaust deniers, that's not anything that I want to be a part of. I certainly won't vote for another Republican, and I vowed I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. I'm just not going to vote. And there are plenty of Republicans that do not want to be in a party that has as its leader Nick Fuentes, J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, and all this other garbage. we're just not going to vote, and we're going to end up having a leftist as president. And what I'll say is, look, you wanted it, you got it. Enjoy it.
Well, Jeff, this was great. Thank you so much. As a young attorney, I've always looked up to guys like you and others who've been in the media. And I just have to say, keep up the great work. We need voices like you. And, I really appreciate you being here. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.